In this film, we're going to be looking at how to correctly calculate the length of a piece of metal, whether it be silver or gold, to make a nice oval bezel for a cabochon stone. My name is Andrew Berry, and welcome to At the Bench's YouTube channel. I've got a lovely garnet cabochon stone here. It's an oval stone, really nice quality. And I want to be able to make the correct length strip of silver in this case to enable us to make a gorgeous perfect fit bezel. I know there are lots of ways out there that you can approximately get the length of the metal to wrap around the stone, but it doesn't take into account the thickness of the bezel strip or the bezel wire or the bearing wire that you're using. And in this short film, we're going to be looking at the correct calculation on how to make the bezel. Now, it's an oval stone, and oval stones are sometimes very calibrated, sometimes they're slightly off. So never go by what the packet says. This packet says a 16 by 12, but I really want to double check. So get your calipers or your ruler or your digital calipers, or whatever you've got to measure, and we measure from top to bottom. And this is actually 16.3, and the width is 12.02. So that's pretty much spot on. Now, when we come to calculate an oval, it's a little bit more complicated than a round stone. So what we have to do is work on the diameter of the stone. Well, how can you do that? Because it isn't round and you can't simply measure the diameter because the length and the width are different sizes. So what we need to do is to add the two dimensions together. We need to add the distance from side to side, which comes in at 12, and then we also need to measure the length, as I just measured now a moment ago, and that comes in at 16.2. So we get our calculator, but the majority of people these days have phones on them, and we need to add 16.2 plus 12, which comes in at 28.2. Now we have to work out the average diameter. So that's the two dimensions. We need to divide that now by 2. Divide that by 2. So the diameter of this oval stone is 14. So we've got that measurement. Now we need to measure the thickness of the wire that we're using to wrap around the stone. In my case, it's just a very simple piece of silver. This is 2.7 millimeters in width, and this is 0.5 millimeter in thickness. So to our calculation here, we need to add 0.5 millimeter, 0.5 of a millimeter. So we got the total of 14.6. Now we times it by pi, which is 3.142. I always do it. So times that by 3.142, and that comes up at 45.8. That is the exact length that you're going to need to cut from the strip of wire to go nicely around the stone, nice and snug. If you didn't add on the thickness of the metal, the bezel is going to be too small, and you're going to have to end up sort of stretching it and hammering it to fit the stone. But this 45.8 should be the exact length that we're going to need. So let's try it out, shall we? Pop our stone to one side. So 45.8, you could do it to 45.5. If you do it to 46, just take a smidgen off the one end just to bring it down that that 1/5 of a millimeter of the correct length that we need. Okay, so we need to get our scribe, and this is on my bench somewhere. There it is there. And we get our strip and we measure. We don't measure exactly from one end because in this instance I've rolled it out and the end isn't straight, I would never even chance measuring right to the end, because if that end is slightly off, you're going to have to file it, and you've already made your piece of metal smaller than what you need to make it. So always come in a couple of millimeters. Literally only need to come in about 1.5 millimeters from that one end. Measure it, 45.8, so there's my mark there, so we can come to 45.8. Or if you have a nice pair of digital calipers like this, you can move this now to 45.8, and you can be really exact with what you're doing. 45.7, there we go, 45.8, there we go, 45.8. And now you can use this to mark off the correct length as well. And I am absolutely spot on with my marks. Okay, now we do not want to cut straight away, because if you cut this end and you cut that end, you're going to have problems. So what I would advise you to do is make this round. Don't try and make it oval straight away. Make it round. It's going to make your life a little bit easier. Get your mandrel and wrap it around the mandrel. Overlap it. And make sure that where your little marks are, you've got a nice curve. Now we cut through the wire, but we never cut on the line. We always cut to the waste side of the line. So then we can always, if need be, file back to our line that we have already scribed. Cut on the line and you don't know then how far you can file backwards into the piece of metal, because you've got no reference point, and also you're going to be filing the piece shorter. So let's pop that onto our peg, and we're not going to cut through both sides at the same time. We're going to cut through. And the reason why I do it this way is the fact that if, for argument's sake, you saw and you naturally saw with your saw blade at an angle like this, you would cut through your one joint here, then you would cut through your next mark, and if your saw is naturally at an angle this way, the ends will be completely parallel because you're cutting in this direction. If you had the strip of metal and you accidentally sort of cut in this direction, you cut the one end this direction, and you turn the end around, the piece of metal around, and you cut the other end, the ends will not come together exactly nice and straight. They may end up coming together like this, and then you've got to file the ends flat. And if you're starting to file the ends flat and square, you're making the metal shorter. So always try and cut in the way I'm showing you, and you'll always have perfectly parallel ends that require no filing, and that is vitally important. So find the mark. First of all, I'm just going to start my little cut. Now don't forget, cut on the waist side, but cut it all the way through. Like that. And now there's our waist that we keep. Now keep the bezel on the peg. Don't turn it over to cut. Bring it around now to our next mark again. Cut on the waist side. Use your nail to hold the blade in place and cut through. And you can see that if we've cut this way on that one side and we cut this way on the other side of our strip, the ends will come together. If they don't come together flush this way, they'll be coming together flush that way. So that's what we've got. You've got a little bit of swarf that's been kicked up by the blade. You can just remove that from the edge of your piece, and then when the faces come together, you will find that those ends, if Jason will want to focus on this, there we go, when the ends come together, they will be parallel, and there's no need now to go filing these faces flat and flush, because they're parallel. And as soon as you start to file these faces, you're making your metal shorter, then you're going to have problems fitting this bezel around your stone. So we've got those faces nice and parallel. Get a little bit of emery paper now on the outsides, clean up the outsides from our fingerprints, but on the inside it's a little bit more awkward. Just get a file on the inside just to clean up where we've soldered, and pop these together, maneuver these into position so the faces come together absolutely perfectly like that. Make sure that you get the most perfect solder joint. Make sure that the edges here are running nice and straight. Make sure when you look at the bezel, you don't have a step. It's all looking absolutely perfect. And then once you're happy with that, pop that on your soldering block. So once you popped it on the block, get your little bit of flux, put that on both sides. Make sure the flux travels through. That's why I do it front and back, to use capillary action. Then we need to get a small little piece of solder. You don't need a huge amount. Small little piece like that. That looks quite a thick, large piece, but it's not, because I've actually rolled the end of my solder nice and thin. Pick up that. You can put it on top of the joint, or some people will actually put it on the soldering block and then rest the bezel directly on top of that. So that piece of metal now is spanning both ends. It's an ideal type of a way of soldering to ensure that that little bit of solder now is not going to move. Grab our torch. And what we're going to do is just heat up the back of the bezel first of all, just to warm up that little bit of flux. Bring the flame now towards the joint. Don't put the flame right on the joint, just bring the flame back. Let the bushiness of the flame, as you can see, there we go, the solder flows all the way up. The solder will always flow towards the hottest part. Put that bit of flame on the outside of the bezel, make sure that solder's come through. Absolutely gorgeous, very simple. And let's pop that into our safety pickle just to get some of those oxides off, and then we're going to pop it into the water. So that is our bezel. It's nicely rounded, which is great. Just dry that off, and then we can get a little file to go on the inside. You may have a little bit of excess solder. If you need to remove that little bit of solder, do it now before we go any further, because you can remove that solder, otherwise it may be hammered into your silver. Just gently tidy up if you've got a bit of excess on the outside as well. Just remove that little bit. So that's looking good. Nice, neat joint. What we're going to do next, your bezel may not be completely round. Mine's pretty round, not exactly round itself. Pop that up onto the mandrel, and all you want to do is just tap this round. We're not going to try and tap it bigger. We don't want it bigger. It should be the perfect size as we've got it. So just make sure that now it is nicely rounded. When it comes round to the joint by here, just tap it. Perfect. All right then. So that's what we've got. We've got a nice round bezel, and we've got a nice oval stone. Now, it's really quite a simple matter. I would just simply squash this now with your fingers slightly. I wouldn't necessarily use a hard surface, because it's going to produce a flat where it's in contact with the hard surface. Your fingers are nice and fleshy. Work out now where you're going to have your solder joint. And for ease, I would have it either at these points, top and bottom, or I would have it on one of the sides, just so it comes exactly where you want it. So when you come to do any more work, you know approximately where that solder joint is going to be. So I'm going to have it at the point ends. So I'm just going to squeeze my bezel into a slight little oval. And if you want to get a pair of half round pliers, just to maneuver it. And some people will have an oval mandrel. Brilliant. Use your oval mandrel to get this into some sort of shape. Pop the stone down and let's just play around with this to see how close we can get this to fit. And it is important to make sure that the bezel does fit without it being sort of squashed over the stone. And the idea is to make sure that the bezel fits over nice and snug without really being pushed down too tight. And in fact, that is a pretty awesome fit. The slightest of pushes gets that stone down into that bezel, and that is a gorgeous fit. You can see how close that strip is now to the bottom of the stone. If you really have to push that bezel down tight over the stone and go, oh, yeah, that's a great fit, that's absolutely perfect fit. The problem is when you take the stone out and then when you solder this onto the bezel, you're going to have a hard job trying to get the stone into the bezel. It needs to be a nice fit where the stone can just come along and just gently push into place like that. If it goes in far too loose and the stone wobbles, well then you're going to have to cut and take a section out through your joint and then solder it and put it back together. The way I just showed you, as you just saw then, does produce the most perfect bezel, exactly right first time. If you feel that it is still that little bit too tight, and as you push down, the bezel doesn't go all the way down to the bottom of the stone, well then get your mandrel, slide it back onto your mandrel all the way down to as far as it goes. Look at where it comes to on the gauges here. This is a ring mandrel. Tap it down literally around about 2 or 3 millimeters further than where it is. Take it back off, reshape it, and try it over the stone, and keep going a little bit at a time until that bezel just fits that stone absolutely perfect every single time. In the next film, I'm going to be showing you how to finish off that bezel and how to solder it onto a back plate. Sounds nice and easy, but there's lots of tips and tricks that you're going to learn from that film that you most probably haven't seen anywhere else. So stay tuned for that. Don't forget, please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Don't forget, smash that little bell icon if that is something that you're into, to be notified when films go live on our YouTube channel. Don't forget, if you like this film, please give it a thumbs up. Please share it with your friends. I'd love you to. Thank you so much for watching. In the meantime, my name's Andrew Berry for At The Bench's YouTube channel. Take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.